Hello and welcome back. My name is Johanna, and today we are doing the end of chapter 1. So, this is the 3 higher level parts called Understanding Observations, Understanding Interviews, and Understanding Case Studies. Yet again, I have no credentials, I am just a student, and let's begin. So, Understanding Observations. So, the aim is to gather first-hand information in natural settings. There are different types of observations, being participant observations, non-participant observations, and then a participant observation can either be covert or overt, and a non-participant observation can either be covert or overt. So participant observations. So in participant observations, you have to take field notes, which is an account of what has been observed, but it's a very demanding task because you have to take note of quite a lot. Well, if the case is covert, then it would be without being noticed as well, which can be very challenging. Now, one way you can show reflexivity, which is a good thing, is, and it means to be self-aware, is to add any relevant biographical data. So that is like your personal interests, your political view. I mean, if it's relevant to the research question, of course. So for non-participant observations, there is a reactivity issue because people usually don't act naturally when they know they are being watched. And if you do it in a lab, there's also the case of artificiality, which is that you would not act in a way that you normally would either. There is also an issue with deception because you will most likely have to lie or not really be completely honest or try to do your observation in a way where the people are not aware of what is going on, which obviously has very big ethical concerns. So in naturalistic observations, there are strengths and limitations. So a strength of this is that it has a high ecological validity, which means that because it's in a natural setting, it is more alike real life than if you were to do it in a lab per se. And limitations are reactivity, and there are privacy and consent issues if it is covert, which means that you might be harming a participant because you don't know what their privacy rules are or what their level is, like what they have agreed to. And since it's covert, it's hidden, you cannot consent to it. So what you have to understand about data collection and observations is that there are 3 main ways to take notes. So there's event sampling, which is when a researcher only makes note when they observe the behavior that is being studied. So for instance, if we are talking about moving your left arm, I don't know why that would be studied, but let's say it was, then you would only take note of it when you see someone move their left arm. Now, the next one is point sampling, which is when you make note of behaviors of one participant and then you move on to the next one. So for instance, you have participant 1, 2, and 3. You take note of everything you want to take note of for participant 1, and then you do participant 2, and then participant 3. And then the last one is time sampling, when you make notes at a regular time interval. So every 30 seconds, you write down what the participant is doing. I mean, that's a lot, but whatever the case may be, you would do it like that. So now we're going to talk about the deductive approach when it comes to data collection. So this is when you make a structured observation using a checklist. Because of this checklist, and this checklist contains like certain behaviors you are looking for. So let's say someone scratches their ear is one of them. Then you check it every time someone scratches their ear, and so on and so forth. This means that it's very standardized because obviously anyone can be trained to know what is on the checklist and like to check off those things, except it might limit the observation because obviously then you won't be seeing what patterns naturally emerge. You'll only be looking for the things on the checklist. Now for the inductive approach, this is more with unstructured observations, which means you have no checklist and you look for whatever patterns emerge in the data. So you might film this either taking notes, record this either taking notes or with a camera. If it's over, you can get consent and you can protect your participants. But if it's covert, it might lead to a lot of ethical considerations because these people have not agreed to be on camera. Now, analyzing and interpreting observations. So there's an inductive content analysis. There are 4 steps that I personally have identified. They do not say it in steps in the actual book. So the first one is the classification process, which is reading the field notes and identifying bits of data to create categories. After these themes have been classified, the themes are the categories, you look for higher order themes and sub-themes. So you start clustering everything together to try and get like the main thing. And then you write memos, which are notes of notes about how connections were reached. So this is basically so that anyone would be able to understand exactly how you got to the result you got to. And at the end, you produce a coherent explanation and an overall theoretical framework for understanding the phenomenon. Now, this theoretical framework is grounded if it is based on the categories that were identified previously. So let's say your categories were childhood trauma or something. Then if your theoretical framework is based on that, then it is grounded. Now we're moving on to the next part, which is about case studies. So, case studies is an in-depth investigation on human experiences. There are intrinsic case studies, which only represent nothing but themselves, which means they do not generalize for other issues, and they are not supposed to generalize for other issues. The next type of case study is an instrumental case study. They represent more than the general phenomena of interest. This essentially means that you can generalize about it and apply it to situations outside the original case. This also means that it's super important to include psychological, sociocultural, historical, and biological dimensions within your report. The strengths to this are that you produce rich data, which means that it's data that is very in-depth with a lot of detail. There is triangulation, and you can contradict already established theories. So essentially, because you're using a real-life situation, you can prove that a theory is artificial and such. The limitations to an instrumental case study is that it can't be replicated. There is social desirability effect because a participant may want to be seen as good. And there might also be researcher bias. That was the last thing for that part. Now, the last higher level part we will be going through is understanding interviews. First, we're going to talk about considerations before, during, and after an interview. So before an interview has started, you have to prepare by training the interviewer to avoid interviewer effect. This could be training an interviewer not to react to responses in a way that would signal to the participant that they are being judged, because this obviously might not make you want to answer in the most honest way. Another way to solve interviewer effect is to counterbalance by having interviewers varying in age, gender, communication style, and so on and so forth, so that you have at least some responses that will not be affected. You have to also write an interview guide and schedule, which is essentially a script to what you're going to ask. And when writing your open-ended questions, there are specific types of questions you have to use. You can use descriptive questions, which means that they invite the participant to give a general account of something. So that could be, for instance, how did you feel when your parents got divorced? The next type of question is a structural question. This means to explore the response to a descriptive question. So for instance, if I asked, how did you feel when your parents got divorced, and the participant described it as complicated, I can then ask a follow-up question, a structural question, where I ask them, can you explain what you meant by complicated? Like, essentially to elaborate on what the participant has already said. Then there are contrast questions, which allow the participant to compare events. So this could be, do you prefer summer or winter? Stuff like that. And the last type of question is an evaluative question, which is you ask about the participant's feelings. So instead of just asking, it's more in the sense of do you like this? Does this make you sad? So on, so forth. Now the last thing you have to do before an interview starts is you have to do a briefing about how data recording will be happening, and also get consent from your participant. Now, during an interview, it is important to use an active listening technique. This means that you are restating participants' comments within later questions. So this shows the participant that you are indeed listening and that you care about what they feel, and it will build a good relationship between the interviewer and interviewee. Now, after an interview is done, you have to think about the transcription of the data. So there are two different ways this can be done. You can transcribe the data verbatim, which means that you do it word for word. And this is enough for the analysis as well. Or you can use postmodern transcription. This means you include laughter, pauses, volume, and other issues like that. So when you write the data into words instead of audio or video, you then include places where you might write, oh, the participant laughed, or the participant interrupted me, or something like that. Then you have to debrief your participant, essentially explaining exactly what the experiment did, what you're going to do with the data, all this stuff. And then you also can establish credibility. So you establish credibility by letting the participant read. I mean, this is an optional thing, but you let the participant read your report and see if they agree with it or not. If they agree with it, you are credible. If they don't agree with it and they don't think your interpretation is correct, then it's not a credible case study. And you also have to inform the participant that they have the right to withdraw any information they shared in the interview if they want to. Now, let's talk about the inductive content analysis on the actual transcripts. This can also be called a thematic analysis. This is when you look for themes within the data. There are 5 steps that I have found in the book. The book does not actually show these 5 steps. I have just identified them. So if you're writing this in one of your exams, do not write step 1 or step 2 or step 3 because they do not go in that order. So first, the researcher rereads the transcripts and produces notes on the initial thoughts that they made when doing the research. The second step is to identify any themes that are emerging. Then the third step, you put clusters and you give those clusters labels, so essentially grouping the themes into bigger groups. And then you find higher order themes, which is like, let's say that your higher order theme is like relationships with your parents, and then themes within that theme could be a reward or punishment, like how you were rewarded when you were younger and how you were punished when you were younger, for example. Then the fourth step is to write an interpretation of the data, and the fifth step is optional, but it's to establish credibility, as I mentioned before. Either you ask a participant to read your report and see if they agree, or you ask another researcher. Either one is perfectly valid and will help you become credible. So the last part of this unit is to talk about focus groups. So a focus group is when you interview a group of people. The group size ranges from 8 to 12 people because if you are more, it is very hard to get every single person to speak. Purposive sampling is usually used for this. Group processes help people explore and clarify their ideas and develop them in a way that a one-to-one interview would not have been able to do. In this case, the researcher is not really the interviewer, it's more he or she or they have more of the role of a facilitator. This means that they introduce the group members to each other, they establish the topics, and they monitor the group discussions to make sure that everybody stays on track, but you're not really the one asking questions because in the focus group, people are developing the questions together. The strength of this is that you collect data simultaneously for many individuals. So instead of having one interview and getting one set of data, you have one interview and get 12 sets of data. So it's faster. It has a higher ecological value because it's more likely for a person in real life to talk to their friends about something than to just talk to, an interviewer. It's more like real life, more closer to real life. It helps people explore their ideas as well. The limitations to this is that there's an issue with confidentiality because members of the group know who you are and they know what you said, which means that they might go outside the research team and talk to other people about what you shared, even if you shared something really sensitive. There's an issue with conformity, which means that members of the group may or may not just follow along with like the leader of the group or anyone with the group. Like the majority of people say one thing, so you just agree because you want to fit in. And the data is very difficult to analyze because there's no standard answer. It's not a yes or no question being asked, it's a discussion being had. So it's way harder and it takes way more time to analyze. And that was it for the higher level content of chapter 1. So after you watch the 3 videos I've made on chapter 1, that is everything for chapter 1. So we will move on to chapter 2 next video. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe, like, and comment. You can follow me at Johanna Frennert on Instagram if you like. I hope you learned something. Goodbye.